The tensions between Iran and the United States have reached a fever pitch. Reports suggest that Trump may authorize limited strikes on Iran any day. Washington is also reportedly considering taking out the Iranian supreme leader and his son. With the US warships now closing in, the two countries are closer to a war than ever before. And our next report tells you more.
A military build-up like never before. The USS Gerald R. Ford is already in the Mediterranean. Iran just tested a missile via its Sayed-3 defense system. The battle toolkit is assembling, raising the stakes for a full-blown war. Reports say that US President Donald Trump hasn't made up his mind yet. But he has confirmed that he is considering limited strikes to force Tehran to sign a nuclear deal. And an Axios report says that taking out Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his son Mojtaba is one of the options on the table.
President, are you considering a limited military strike to pressure Iran into a deal?
Thank you, press. Keep moving. Thank you.
Are you considering a limited strike, sir?
I guess I am considering.
As tensions escalate, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi says a draft nuclear plan will be ready in the next 2 to 3 days. Araghchi has also called the US military buildup unnecessary and unhelpful. His comments come a day after Trump issued a 15-day ultimatum to Iran. The US president has warned Tehran of very bad things if it fails to strike a deal.
It's proven to be over the years not easy to make a meaningful deal with Iran. We have to make a meaningful deal. Otherwise, bad things happen. But we have to make a meaningful deal.
But Tehran isn't flinching. In the Sea of Oman, it conducted joint naval drills with Russia. US warships are moving in attack formation. The second US aircraft carrier is closing in on Iran, joining the USS Abraham Lincoln, already stationed near the country. It signals a massive escalation in the US standoff with Iran. Washington isn't just sending a message, it is preparing for a multi-front assault that dwarfs any military movement seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. US military aircraft have also been spotted in an airbase in Portugal, signaling heightened military buildup. Iran, however, says it will not be deterred. Tehran says that the US military bases and assets across the region are legitimate targets in the event of an attack. US bases in the region extend from the UAE to Qatar and Bahrain to Iraq and Syria. Around 40,000 American troops are believed to be stationed in these bases. Two powerful militaries are watching each other across a volatile chessboard. One misstep could trigger an all-out war. The warning has been sent. The countdown continues. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
All right, now to put all of this in perspective, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by Professor Giorgio Cafero, who's a professor at the Georgetown University and also CEO at Gulf State Analytics. Professor Cafero, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, this is reported to be the biggest military buildup in the Gulf since the 2003 American invasion of Iraq. Recently, Donald Trump has said that what he's looking at are limited strikes. In your assessment, this is probably one of the biggest decisions that Donald Trump has to make during the course of his presidency. What do you think Donald Trump is now expected to do from here on?
Yeah, thank you for having me back on your program. Great to be with you. Always difficult to predict what an unpredictable leader like Trump is going to do. I do believe that Trump ultimately would like to avoid a new military conflict in the Middle East, especially one that could pull the United States into this region in very, very costly ways. It's also unclear what the objectives would be. I think Donald Trump understands that many within his base and many throughout the U.S. population at large are not in favor of protracted military conflicts in the Middle East that cost the United States a lot in blood and treasure. Having said that, I think given the extent to which Trump has built up this U.S. military presence in the Middle East, it's not necessarily so easy for the leadership here in Washington to just sort of reverse course. As a former U.S. diplomat put it very well recently, this type of military buildup has a momentum of its own. It's a rather tall tree to climb down from. And given the maximalist demands that the White House has set forth, I have huge concerns that the Trump administration has created conditions whereby it sort of forces itself into taking military action against Iran. Of course, it's not necessary for the U.S. to do it. It is possible for a diplomatic off-ramp. But I do have huge concerns about the fact that the Trump administration has made many moves that make it more difficult to back down at this point.
You know, it's interesting that you say that this sort of a build-up has a momentum of its own, and it is difficult to find an off-ramp from here. But looking at as to how things have progressed, especially in the context of what's been happening between the United States and Iran, last year, Donald Trump was in many ways forced to get involved in this Iran-Israel war. The Americans bombed 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Now, this time round, in your assessment, are things going to be different? Because the Iranians too are responding. They've learned from the conflict that happened last year. The Iranians have shifted away from GPS onto Beidou. And the Russians and the Chinese also seem, to a certain extent, willing to offer a certain level of support to the Iranians. How do you think that changes the equation?
Well, the landscape is definitely different this year compared to last year. I think, you know, there were many lessons that the Iranians learned from the 12-day war. I think one of them may have been that they were not aggressive enough in terms of doing what Tehran believed it needed to do to deter a foreign attack. And therefore, I think this is what helps us understand the actions that Iran has been taking in recent weeks to try to signal to the United States that the costs of bombing Iran would be much higher this year compared to June of 2025. You know, let's keep in mind there was the episode at the end of that war in which Iran fired missiles and drones at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. That was a very choreographed and pre-signaled attack. I think what Iran wants everyone to know is that its retaliation to any possible U.S. or Israeli strike on Iran at this point would be met with retaliation that is much more intense. It's not pre-signaled, not choreographed, and much more unpredictable. This has naturally left many, many statesmen in neighboring countries very nervous right now. And I think also Trump has to consider the fact that Iran's response could result in the death of many U.S. military personnel and the targeting of many U.S. interests throughout the region. So I think, in short, really to get to your question, I think the stakes are much higher. And if a conflict is to start at this point, it could last a lot longer than 12 days and prove much more destabilizing than the Iranian-Israeli war last year.
I think you've touched upon the contours of what the conflict could, of course, look like if it were to happen. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Kafero, for joining us with that perspective there.
Good to be with you. Thank you.